Our next speaker co-founded the Good Jobs Institute on the premise that good operations don't have to be at the expense of good working environments for your employees. In fact, it's just the opposite. Good jobs and good operations can together create a dynamic force for an organization to succeed. So please give a warm welcome to Sarah Kalloch of the Good Jobs Institute.
All right, good afternoon. I am so thrilled to be here at Syracuse. It's my first time here, so I'm going to need to know where the good bars are later. I'm so excited to be here as we all honor two giants in the world of operations management, Toyota and Professor Corbett. They have done so much to make operations something that has deep heart and deep impact, right? Operational excellence changes companies. Operations management changes lives. That's why all of you are here. That's why you're studying in this school, because you want to make a huge difference in your life. And that's the core of what we do at the Good Jobs Institute. We are a nonprofit based in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and our mission is to help companies thrive by creating good jobs. The other part of our mission is to help change the definition of what it means to run a good business. Our work is based on the work of Zeynep Ton, who is an operations management professor at MIT's Sloan School of Management. She came up with something called the Good Jobs Strategy, which is what I'm going to be talking about today, through 20 years of research in retail supply chain and operations. What we do at the Institute is we apply this fantastic academic framework and work directly with companies in industries that have large, frontline, traditionally low-wage workforces. So think retail, restaurants, hospitality, call centers, warehousing, logistics, some manufacturing, some distributed services like HVAC and other sort of pest control, anything where you've got teams going out into the world doing services. And we help those companies apply the Good Jobs Strategy to evolve and change and improve their operating model so that they can offer fantastic customer service, fantastic jobs, and also great returns for their investors. So as you can imagine, you hear the Good Jobs Institute, you hear Good Jobs Strategy, we're definitely talking about better jobs. In traditionally low-wage frontline jobs, pay is really critical to improve that job, right? Anybody know what the federal minimum wage is here in the United States? Shout it out. $7.25. Okay? Pay is critical. We've got to pay people more who are doing essential work in this country. But pay is not enough. It's not enough to make a job good, and it's not enough to make the job good for workers. It's not enough to make a job good for companies. Pay alone doesn't make the job a good one. So if all companies just paid workers more and didn't change the work that they do, they might have to raise wages for their customers. They might have to reduce profits. And indeed, that's what you often hear from companies when talking about a raise in minimum wage, right? Is we can't do that because we're going to lose money or we're going to have to pass those costs on to customers. What's magical about operations management is operations can break that trade-off between good jobs and a great business. And that's what we try to do at the Good Jobs Institute, right? Well, I got to get my operations going here. So higher pay requires higher productivity. Higher productivity requires better work. And better work is driven by operations and supply chain decisions. And better work drives good jobs. So let me tell you all about this. Let me tell you about the Good Job Strategy and how all of this comes together in the work that we do. I'm going to start with the origins of the Good Job Strategy, and that is in Zeynep's work on the effect of store execution on product availability. So when she was doing her PhD, she was in a group of about 30 retailers, in a research group with 30 retailers. She worked on Borders. That's what her dissertation was on. How many people here have heard of Borders books? Yeah, not too many people in the back because they've been bankrupt for some time, which she always likes to say is not because of her dissertation. But this team was working on supply chain. So Borders sold books, and Zeynep would go into a Borders anywhere in the United States, and the supply chain had gotten the books to the store. But once they were in there, a whole bunch of those books were getting lost. So she found 18% of customers who asked for help at Borders were experiencing something called a phantom stockout. Have any of you experienced a phantom stockout? Do you know what that is? Yes. I can feel the energy in the room. Yes. You all know this, right? You go online, you think there's a dress at Banana Republic, it's at the mall that's close by, you go there and it's not in, right? So they think it's in, maybe it's in the store, but you can't find it. The employees can't find it. And this was a huge problem in the supply chain research. In other sort of looking at other companies, these phantom stockouts made up 20 to 30% of stockouts, and some CPG companies, 60% at a specialty retailer. This is huge. This is bad, right? The supply chain, we just saw amazing Maersk supply chain, all of that work to get the items to the store, and the customers aren't connecting with it, right? This is a massive, massive problem. So Zainab dug in and she said, what's going on here? And she identified what she calls the vicious cycle. So in some of these stores that had high numbers of phantom stockouts, they also had high turnover. So, you know, people were quitting these jobs after 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, really high turnover. They were understaffed. They didn't have enough people working in the store. And they often didn't have time to train people because of this high turnover. And so the folks had low ability. It wasn't because they weren't fantastic, it's because they weren't trained and they weren't given a chance to be really great because there was a lot of instability. And with that instability came poor execution. So you all have either worked or been to retail, restaurants, all of those things. You know what poor execution looks like, right? In retail, it's dirty stores, out of stock, long lines. In restaurants, long lines, poor food quality, bad service, right? So all sorts of poor execution starts happening. And when you've got poor execution, your customers aren't connecting to the product and services that they want. And so you've got lower sales and profit. And when you've got lower sales and profit, you've got to cut somewhere. And what's the biggest, juiciest thing to cut in the P&L? It's people, right? Wages, hours, jobs. You cut that, it's immediate, the impact on the P&L, right? You can see it. You've cut costs, you're doing great. But the downstream long-term impact of that on your operations, on your people, on your customers is much harder to measure. And so companies end up in this vicious cycle. They cut people investment, and that leads to higher turnover and more understaffing and lower ability. And that leads to even worse execution. All of you in operations, you know that poor execution is expensive, right? So again, Zainab's research found that there are lower sales from misplaced products, data inaccuracy, omni-channel mistakes, long lines, slow service, poor service. You've all experienced this, right? And in the future, from poor merchandising, lost customer goodwill. And there's also higher costs, shrink, spoilage. We're talking about environmental sustainability. All of this is connected. When you've got high turnover and bad jobs, you're having much higher waste of things like food in restaurants and grocery stores. Food that, again, traveled all around the world to get there, and we're wasting it. Returns, low labor productivity, overtime, lots of higher costs that really are expensive for customers and expensive for companies. So why is execution so poor? What has Zainab's research and our work with companies found? We've noticed this complexity ability gap. So over time, companies add a lot of complexity. They add products, they add services, they add all sorts of new tools, right? They love to add. Companies never take away. They never simplify. They never stop doing the stupid stuff, right? So complexity goes up. And at the same time, their investment in people usually doesn't go up with that level of intensity, and sometimes not at all, and sometimes it goes down. So employees' ability to cope with that complexity starts to kind of plateau. That complexity is often driven by upstream functions, right? So what does that mean? Let's think about a retailer. How many of you have worked in retail or restaurants? Anybody? Awesome. So I think you will understand what I'm saying here. Let's think about a retailer in apparel, right? So it's the weekend, that's your peak time. You're going to sell a lot of t-shirts, a lot of shorts. Well, your biggest shipment comes in on Saturday morning. And so you've got a really short time to get that stuff on the floor. Really hard to do that well. But you know what? Those shorts, they weren't selling. So marketing has decided to do a big new marketing push. They sent out an email Friday. Your manager didn't have enough time to staff up. So you have all these people coming in with a coupon. You don't have enough shorts. Is this sounding familiar, anybody? Anybody remember the Starbucks unicorn Frappuccino? Anybody have the unicorn Frappuccino? Probably not. It wasn't around that long because it was an operational nightmare. Beautiful products, sparkly, fantastic, Instagrammable, but they didn't give the stores enough training, enough time to schedule people. And, it was a huge operational disaster, long lines, lots of challenges. So teams in the store can do a lot to improve operations, but a lot of the work is dictated by merchandising, by marketing, by the supply chain, by when the deliveries come, right? And so a lot of that complexity comes because all of those different departments are optimizing locally. They're optimizing for their own set of incentives. And they're saying, downstream, you all just figure it out. But that's really hard, and that's really, really challenging for workers, for stores, for managers. At the same time, there's low people investment. And there's a mental model that a lot of companies have that labor is just a cost to be minimized. The market pay is the right pay because the market's always right. And lean and mean is efficient. And not the wonderful lean of TPS, but sometimes folks just say lean, let's cut, let's cut, let's cut. And eventually you're not cutting it, you're cutting into bone and muscle, you're cutting into things you don't want to cut. So this complexity ability gap is something that we see in a lot of the companies that we work with. And what they don't really understand, and what we help companies understand, is that high turnover is ruinous. It's far, far, far less competitive than you think. A lot of the industries where we work, turnover is seen as a cost of doing business, but it's very expensive. So first, there are direct and indirect costs that you can calculate. There is a direct cost to recruit, to hire, to get uniforms, train, ramp people up to base productivity. We found with some of the companies we work with, this can be 10 to 20% of payroll. So there's a direct cost of turnover. And the turnover we're talking about, it's not 30 or 40%. We work with convenience stores that have 200% turnover. Can you imagine? The team is turning over multiple times a year. It's very unstable. That instability leads to indirect execution costs in that vicious cycle. And we talked a little bit about what that can cost: sales, revenue, and lots of sort of direct costs as well. The companies that we work with will often do a quartile analysis. We'll look at their stores with the lowest turnover versus their stores with the highest turnover. And we'll look at some of the operational and customer service metrics that matter most to them. And we almost always find that those stores with lower turnover have better operational performance, right? So this was a convenience store. Their stores with higher turnover had much higher shrink. This is a retail store, national retail provider. Their stores with lower turnover have much higher net promoter scores, right? So their customers are much happier. So turnover, really expensive, directly, and some of those indirect execution costs. But then there's system costs. And this is something for all of you to think about as operations leaders. When you have high turnover, it's really hard to build a company that has a high expectations environment where everyone is problem solving, where everyone is innovating, right? When you've got people turning over every 3 to 6 months, you end up in a low trust environment with a lot of command and control, no creativity. We're wasting the amazingness of humans when we put them in a command and control environment and we don't trust them and we create low expectations, right? But that's what happens. And this is very hard to measure. And it makes you far less competitive, far less able to differentiate yourselves, far less able to sustain yourselves long-term. But you can look pretty good for a long time, right? Companies can still grow profits by adding more, adding to that complexity, right? They can add units and products and services, or they can cut labor, adding to that vicious cycle until they can't. Many of the companies come to us because they are in this vicious cycle and they cannot get out and they cannot grow anymore until they can get out, right? This is a quote from one of the leaders we work with. Financial pressure leads us to try to be everything to everyone, and that's not a strategy. But the great news in Zeynep's research and our work with companies is that the vicious cycle is not inevitable. So her first book, The Good Job Strategy, which if you are looking for, I was going to say a beach read, but we're in fall. If you're looking for like an apple picking, like cute book read, this is a great book. It's both excellent in terms of operations management, but it's also a really fun read that tells the story of excellent companies who've made a different set of decisions. So Zeynep chose to focus on low margin, low price industries, right? If you're selling, maybe Tiffany's jewelries, of course you can offer good jobs, but what if you're in the gas station convenience store world? What if you're in very low cost Costco warehousing world, right? So she looked at companies that do things very differently. Quick Trip. Anybody been to a Quick Trip? Awesome. They're a gas station convenience store chain in the South, Midwest, moving west as well. Their frontline turnover is way lower than their industry average. In 2019, their full-time turnover was 20%. The industry average for full-time was 80%. It's a significant difference. Part-time, their turnover was 64%, industry average 125. Look at their frontline tenure. Their store managers have been with them for 16 years. First assistants, 9 years. Their part-timers have been with them for 2 years, right? When you think I was talking about 200% turnover, that's not happening for them. They have far lower turnover. Costco. Anybody here a Costco member? Gotta love Costco. Well, their employees love Costco and they don't leave. Their turnover is 17% in aggregate, but 6% for employees with a tenure of more than a year. When you go there, you can look at their name tags because everyone has the number of years they've been working at Costco. 60% have been there for more than 5 years. 33% have been there for more than 10 years. What does that mean? That means they know what the bakery looks like at Christmas, right? And you really want somebody there who knows, because that is a high velocity, high volume retail environment, and you need people who are really committed to it. So companies that have really low prices and really low margins are able to offer jobs that keep people and people want to stay. How do they do it? First, they invest a lot more in people than their competitors, especially in pay. So pay is fundamental. Like I said, $7.25 is the minimum wage federally. I don't know what it is in New York State. Maybe 15, probably higher. The cost of living here is higher. But again, the cost of living is much higher than $7.25 anywhere in the country. But they all believe, their mental model is that they're going to win by having a great team, and they're going to do what it takes to attract and retain that team. So you can read, these are the founders of Quick Trip, of Trader Joe's, of Costco, right? Paying people more than they expect has been one of Quick Trip's secrets to success, even though it's never been a secret at all. I was and am still shocked that our competitors never copied it. So they all pay more because they know that the absence of sufficient pay is a guarantee for turnover. So this is our employee pyramid. It's based on Maslow's hierarchy of need. And so what do employees need? First, they need their basic needs met. And that's what's at the bottom here. They've got to have pay and benefits that allow them to support their families. They've got to have schedules that are stable and predictable. And this is especially hard in a lot of service environments. Full-time workers in retail, with every company we work with, we sort of help them trace the adequacy and predictability of the schedules that they give their team members. If you're full-time, 1 week you might be working 45 hours, the next week 28, the next week 35, the next week 25. Your hours are all over the place. Your bills are the same, right? It's really hard to create a budget if you don't have a stable schedule. Career paths, clear and fair advancement to higher pay, and then security and safety. Safety being really important for workers. So you've got to meet those basic needs. You've also got to meet some of those higher needs, but those basic needs really drive turnover. The absence of sufficient pay also hurts employees, and it hurts their ability to have a life, frankly. It's really stressful when you're not paid enough. So we've got a vicious cycle that companies end up in. Sometimes their workers, when they're not being paid enough, will also end up in a vicious cycle of poverty. And it looks like low pay. And then you can't meet your obligations. You can't pay rent on time. You can't pay food on time. Your car breaks down and you don't have $400 to fix it. That's a predicament that a lot of Americans are in. A significant number of Americans don't have $400 for an emergency. When you're under that kind of stress and you're having to make those kinds of decisions, your health suffers. So there's a lot of scholarship out there about the impact of financial stress on people's mental and physical health. When you're under that kind of stress, you make more mistakes. You're not as productive. You might not even be able to get to work because, again, you couldn't fix your car. Professor Carrie Liana at Pitt has some great research on the impact of financial stress on workers. So financial stress makes nurses less empathetic, which means that their patients have worse health outcomes. Financial stress makes truck drivers more likely to get in accidents, which is bad for their health, bad for the community, and also bad for the company. So then you're not doing well at work. You might get fired. You've got lower pay, and you're in a vicious cycle of poverty that's very hard to get out of. And this is a huge problem for companies, for people, and for our community, our country, right? We need people to have good jobs where they can support their families. But that said, pay is incredibly important, but it is not enough for workers or for companies. And that's where the good job strategy comes in. That's where operations management comes in. So the good job strategy at its core is investment in people, outsized investment in people. You've got to do that to make sure you can reduce that turnover, to create that stability that can help you execute operational excellence. But then you've got to make great operational choices across your entire system so that you can drive the productivity you need, the service you need to grow as a company. So the good job strategy is 4 operational choices with investment in people in the middle. And it drives a better employee experience. So you have lower turnover, higher motivation. It drives productivity, so you have stronger operational execution. And then it drives a better customer experience, so you have higher satisfaction, higher loyalty. You can read what the 4 choices are: focus and simplify, standardize and empower, cross-train, operate with Slack. All of these are pretty foundational operational elements, right? So focus and simplify, you've got sort of Skinner and the focused factory. Listening to Toyota today, Toyota is well known, frankly, for all of these aspects of great operations, but standardized work plus that empowerment for their workers to be able to identify problems and drive quality. Cross-training promotes flexibility. And then there's operate with Slack. Queuing theory, news vendor, anybody? You got into that yet? Just wait, it's fun. All right. Woo! Those tell us that in environments where there's variability, you don't want to be operating at 100% capacity utilization, because it's not going to work and it's going to be bad for your business and bad for your customers. So the 4 operational choices, they're not rocket science, but what the good jobs strategy does is, 1, it puts them together. It has them really work in combination to create a different operating system. And 2, it puts people at the center and says, you've got to make sure that your teams are really strong because they're the ones who are going to be executing all of this great operations management work. So that's how we close this gap. Complexity is closed by focusing and simplifying, by standardizing work. And then that ability to deal with complexity is increased by investment in people, empowerment, cross-training, and operating with Slack. So we've got Toyota here today. You'll see there's a lot of echoes and similarities. You've seen the Toyota house. Smart operations design requires motivated, capable, and stable workforces. You've got to have both, right? The Toyota production system, you'll see if a company has high employee turnover, they're not pursuing TPS. The foundation of that house is stability, and one of those M's is manpower, person power, right? You've got to have stable people who are able to execute fantastic operations. The good job strategy is a different mental model for winning. So typical companies, they are all else is equal, financial thinking, let's optimize locally, people are a cost, market pay is the right pay, command and control. Operations can get us out of that set of false trade-offs and get us to more system, customer-centric thinking. And that's what the good job strategy does. And that's what we try to help companies do here in the United States and around the world. So I wanted to give a couple of examples of outcomes from recent good jobs journeys at companies that are in retail, that are in call centers, and that are in restaurants. So I'm going to go deep on Sam's Club and then just touch on the other couple of examples. Sam's Club, is there a Sam's Club around here? I don't know. Okay, awesome. Used to be. Well, used to be because in 2018, Sam's Club had a tough time. We're having a tough time, and they closed about 60 stores. They might have closed the one around here. And they knew that they needed to do something radically different to turn around their company. So they wanted to be the best loved warehouse brand. And they wanted to do that by returning to their core, which was small assortment, low prices, great customer experience, and also finding a new way to differentiate themselves through omni-channel convenience. Costco, you can't do curbside pickup there. They wanted to be a convenience play for their customers. They're struggling. They need to have better customer service. They need to have this omni-channel presence. So they've got to have better inventory management. They've got to have better customer NPS. They've got to have all sorts of big changes. And all of them are predicated on a frontline team that can really do the work and can really be part of the solution, right? So what did they do? the first thing they did is they said, let's focus and simplify, right? We've got too many products. We've got too many things going on. How can we simplify the work that happens in these warehouses so we can be there for our members who pay to come shop with us? So the first thing they did is they reduced their SKU count by 10 to 20%. This is a big significant change, right? And that involves lots of departments. That involves merchandising, that involves supply chain, that involves a lot of decision makers. And then they said, okay, we're going to have fewer products. And then we're also going to simplify the way that we stock. So they had put too many shelves in the store and people were, stocking 10-pound Tide cans, by hand. They went back to a more palletized stocking, right? And this took some changes in the store layout. This took a lot of operations know-how to figure out how can we really simplify that non-value add work of stocking and get our associates in front of customers more often. Fewer items, simplified stocking, unlocked. Wait a second. We have an overnight shift where nobody sees any of our members. All they do is stock all night. If we simplify all of that, can we actually eliminate the overnight shift? And the answer was yes. But let's go back to the good job strategy. What else would have to be true to eliminate that overnight shift? Well, we are going to need block schedules so that people are coming in at 5 a.m. in a team, cross-trained, ready to go, ready to get the store ready, right? So they introduced block schedules, which made much more consistent schedules and hours and predictability for their teams. They also wanted more full-time workers because they wanted folks who were always there, who they could depend on, because they were doing a lot of work in a limited amount of time. They did cross-training, they did a task analysis, and they took out a lot of non-value add work. One of the Sam's executives told us, they went to a club and they saw people, putting some kind of supply chain information into a paper ledger. And they said, why are you doing that? And they said, oh, we need this, we need this. And they said, why? And they said, well, we've always done it this way. And then they said, do you ever go back to that ledger and look at that number or report it out to anyone ever again? And they said, no. And there were so many of those tasks that are just inside of a system. Working with their frontline workers, they identified a ton of them and simplified the work. Then they looked at IT investments. They didn't start with IT investments. They didn't start with AI. They didn't start with that. They said, what can we eliminate? What can we simplify? And then how can we use technology to really augment and support our associates to be there for customers? And they made some really great member and associate facing IT investments. They had a ton of other stuff, but a lot of operational changes. They also needed to change their supply chain, right? If you now all of a sudden don't have an overnight shift and you have a much tighter stocking window, your delivery window has to be much tighter. Your trucks have to come, your everything in your logistics and supply chain has to be tighter. So a big investment there. They could have done all of that and not invested in people and said, we're just going to expect our teams to continue to do what they were doing the way they were doing it. But they knew that they could not have a high expectations environment and get to operational excellence if they did not invest in people. They were paying, a facility start rate of $11 an hour. They also had tens of thousands of workers and couldn't give everyone a raise right away because all of these operational changes hadn't hit yet. The productivity hadn't hit yet. So they said, where do we invest first in people? Who do our members talk to the most? Who is going to have all of these changes sort of on their responsibility, on their plate? Who talks to members the most? The butcher, the cake decorator, those sort of member-facing roles, right? Let's invest heavily in them. We need them. Those are the member relationships that we need to preserve. And then who's going to have to do all this work? Those team leads, right? Of course, the manager and the assistant manager, but those team leads, the head of produce, the head of electronics, they're going to have to usher in all of these changes. We want them to stay, and we want those jobs to be destination jobs, because that's going to start to reduce turnover by making people say, hey, if I stay, I'm going to have a job that's great. They invested $5 to $7 an hour in those jobs. So those folks went from making about $15 to $20 to $22 an hour. This was in about 2019. That was life-changing for people, both for the people on the receiving end of that raise, but also for the executives. When we talk to the executives, leaders who've been, working in Sam's and Walmart for 30 years, that day when they got to announce those raises was one of the best of their careers because they knew that they were changing people's lives. And again, that's why they do the work that they do. So they started with those really outsized investments in a small number of roles, and they've continued to invest in people over time. They got to a facility start rate of 15 in 2021. 2 weeks ago, they raised it to 16 and also made the made a set of investments in tenure, which will get you to a higher wage faster. So Sam's has been on this journey and they've had tremendous results. You can read about it in Zeynep's second book, Subtle Placement, The Case for Good Jobs, which is also a great read. Their turnover decreased 25%. Their productivity increased 16% increase in units sold per hour. And they told us that these are great operators at Sam's and Walmart, fantastic operations professionals. And they had done a lot of work for a lot of years to increase productivity. And it would inch up 1%, 1%, very incremental. All of these changes together at once using the Good Job Strategy framework, they got a 16% increase in the productivity that mattered for them. And most importantly, their customer satisfaction and their sales have gone up. Net increase in NPS score of 7%, double-digit same-store sales growth, 12 quarters in a row. Doug McMillan, who's the CEO of Walmart Total, said 19 years ago, I got the opportunity to be the chief merchant at Sam's, and I can confirm there hasn't been a time since when Sam's has had this much momentum. And it was because they had fantastic operations professionals making great operational choices, and because they were investing in people in a way that helped all of this come together as a system. We've seen similar results at Mudbay, which is a 60-store pet retailer in the Pacific Northwest, at Quest Diagnostics in their call centers, which one improvement to call out there, their turnover decreased 52%. And because they had people staying longer, they were able to put in an ideas system. And their team members identified and put in place 1.3 million in run rate savings from frontline ideas. When you have teams that are committed to you, who stay, who are problem solving every day, they're going to save you money and they're going to drive great customer service. We've also seen great impact in small businesses. So Moe's Original Barbecue, 2 barbecue restaurants in Maine, 35 employees. They invested in people and improved their operations and saw a 30% decrease in turnover. And then also sort of unleashed all of this unrealized potential in their sales. Sales went up 20%, but really critically for them, their catering went up 60%. They're doing weddings, they're doing big events, and their teams are actually excited to go and do these on the weekend because they're being paid well, they're stable, and they're part of a team. So this all sounds great, right? Why isn't everybody doing the Good Job Strategy? Why isn't everybody doing TPS, right? We know it works, but it requires an integrated system that includes people investment. And whether you're talking to large public companies with tens of hundreds of thousands of employees, or if you're talking to small businesses, that people investment can feel like an awful lot of money. And oftentimes it is, right? We've had a CFO write on the back, a literal back of an envelope. If we raise wages $2, that's going to be $100 million. Where are we going to make that up, right? And so there are obstacles to adopting a system that requires people investment because of that expense and because of people's misperceptions about frontline workers. So 4 things we often hear. 1, our business model isn't going to support higher investment in people. But if you've got great operations behind you, it absolutely will, right? One we hear, and that really breaks my heart, is we can't trust frontline employees. I think Toyota also talks about assumptions around people. We assume that all people are good and want to do a good job. And if they're not, it's because the system's bad, not because they are bad. We've had business leaders say like, well, our people aren't worth $15 an hour. No, your system isn't worth $15 an hour, right? Our financial analysis shows the investment won't pay off. I know a lot of you are also in finance. I know a lot of you are spending time with spreadsheets. You can make a spreadsheet say anything you want. Think about the long-term impact of any cut or of any investment, right? You may not see the ROI immediately, but it's going to be there. And you've got to sort of look deep into operations. Operations will tell you the story of why investing in people pays off. And then for a lot of companies, implementing systems change is too risky. It's not a quick fix. It's not an easy button. It takes time, but it also leads to long-term sustainability. Zeynep and one of her colleagues at MIT did a great systems dynamics paper a couple of years ago. And they found that companies can make good money with good jobs. And we know that. They also found that companies can make good money with bad jobs. Maybe not forever, but certainly for a long time. We need to make the choice to offer better jobs a lot easier to make, and we need to make the choice to offer bad jobs a lot harder to make. And that is my call to action for all of you. We need to make operations management a force for good. You and what you do in your job and in your career can help impact and improve the lives of tens, hundreds, thousands, millions of people with the operations management and supply chain choices you make. Operations management is a force for good, and I'm really excited to see what all of you as the sort of young leaders in this field go and do. Thank you.
Okay, any questions? Yes. Thank you, Sarah. This is a very interesting. So I wonder if you can comment on the impact of AI and automation on the good job strategy, because there's a lot of a fear among human beings about, robots, AI, automation is going to take jobs away from them. Actually, I was looking at the dock worker strike. Actually, one of the requests from the union was complete ban on automation. So can you comment on that? Thank you.
Yes. So first of all, I would say we work again in a lot of sort of service intensive frontline industries where AI, machine learning may not be replacing people, right? There are robot servers, but people don't necessarily want to be served by a robot all the time. That said, if automation can reduce dumb, dirty, dangerous work, if robots can do jobs that humans shouldn't do, let's do that, right? Let's make sure that the work we ask humans to do is good work. One. Two, the robots haven't taken over yet. They're not going to walk in and take everybody's jobs tomorrow. We have something to say about how this transition happens. And so again, I think this is such a, it's a AI, especially everything is so nascent. And I think there's a lot of, worry about this. 10 years ago, we thought there wouldn't be any truck driver jobs, right? We thought it would all be automated. And now we can't get enough truck drivers, right? Because people stopped going into that field. So I would say, A, it's not going to happen overnight. B, we can control it. And C, parts of this are really good because we don't want humans to do dangerous work. Let's just think really creatively about how AI and automation can augment people. It's not about replacing people.
I'll add to that. I think too, if you apply automation, artificial intelligence to like the bottleneck in the process, and you actually increase the flow through that system, it could actually almost generate a need for additional workers in other parts of the process. And so I think sometimes in this particular case, the longshoremen might be kind of missing that aspect of it. They don't want automation. Well, automation in some places could actually increase the need for workers.
I'll add just one more thing. I think in the past, we've only measured good jobs on the number of jobs. We've got to talk about quality jobs because there's a lot of people who have 2 jobs and 3 jobs. So on some levels, we've got too many jobs because too many people can't support themselves with 1 to 2 jobs. So we can get people a better job that pays better and they can work 1 job instead of 2 or 1 job instead of 3. That's a win. So I think we just have to really think about how to build quality jobs.
Sure.
Do you work with regulators at all? And I understand you work with companies one-to-one a lot, but I feel like a lot of it needs to come from the regulators. Okay, the standard wage needs to increase, working conditions need to improve. Companies are doing the minimum they can with the regulations out there. So do you work with regulators at all?
We don't. We're really small, and so we've decided to be focused on, direct work with companies. That's our expertise. That said, we want this research to be used by policymakers. Again, this points to if you raise a minimum wage, you don't have to lose jobs. Let's drive better operations, right? So I think it can be used to make a lot of great arguments for needed regulations. I think to get more companies, again, offering good jobs and being in that good jobs virtuous cycle, we need carrots. And I think we're the carrot is you can do this in a way that drives business, and you need more sticks and more sort of regulation. So a little bit of both. Any public policy folks here? Anybody in the public policy school? Well, make friends with public policy folks because it's important.
Hello, I'm fascinated by this institute's work and Zainab's research. I wanted to ask you, when you work with companies, how do you help them see the upside? It seems to me that this is like a longer-term play, and yet some of the, for the most part, will be just cost. So how do you help them see the upside that might take actually like a longer-term, view than just maybe a quarter, right?
Yeah, this is a great question. So a lot of folks, again, are talking about the business case for good jobs, talking about ROI. There's probably never going to be a spreadsheet on good jobs that is as compelling as one on, say, marketing, right? So if you're in marketing, if you send out this email, if you do this sale, it will drive this amount of revenue for your company. The science is there. It's pretty well proven. You kind of know what that's going to look like. Saying we want to raise wages $5 an hour, there's no spreadsheet that's going to show you what that looks like. So we need data, we need all of that, but first we need a really compelling narrative around why this is important for your business. So what we do is we help companies say, what are your big aspirations? What are your growth aspirations? What are your customer aspirations? What are the biggest gaps you have between where you are today and meeting those aspirations? And then we try to tie those gaps to that frontline execution. So we really try to build it into who they want to be as a leader, what their legacy is, what the ambition for the company is, and try to help them really deeply understand that they're not going to reach that unless they're driving better jobs. So we're working with one convenience store chain that wants to grow 4x in 8 years, and they don't have a leadership bench. You can't open new stores without a manager, right? And so you've got to think about your workforce differently if you want to get to that growth. So it's a bit of an iterative Socratic process of let's set your ambitions. Let's look at what some possible changes might be. Let's get into the stores. Let's go to the Gemba. Let's talk to people and understand what these big changes are that need to be made. Let's go back. Let's sort of reinforce, but let's bring data in. But there's not a formula for this. It's definitely a strategic process. Great question. If anyone knows how to do it, please come find me.
Hey, thank you for your presentation. I just have a question about, do you think your NGO in the future will be applied to like countries that are having like a lack of government like intervention like Vietnam? Because I know like labor work and hours like kind of difficult there. So
yeah, that's a great question. So we have started our work in the United States. We have done some work in Europe, which has much stronger labor standards than the United States. And so on some levels, it's easier to do the good job strategy when you have stronger labor standards. We're starting to do work in other parts of the world that have, weaker governments and little to no labor standards. So I'm going to get back to you on that. But I think, again, in those places, business has a lot of power, and you can make choices around your business that, that if you want to run a different kind of business, I think you can. But I imagine it's going to be more challenging. So again, if you have any thoughts, come find me afterwards, but great question.